Hey hey! If you've watched a few of my videos, you know that the Ironhearth Hall is one of my favorite rooms. But wait, what is happening? Why is he attacking? Oh yeah, that's right. It's because I'm playing Vanilla DS2. In the improved sChoLaR edition, there is no along captain here that follows you into this room. And instead of having to fight him and a turtle, it's two Aldia Knights, which is just a bit easier. In this video I will take a closer look at Feeble King's sChoLaR rUiNeD DS2 video to see if that clickbaited title is even true.
Perhaps you've seen it, maybe in a dream. A murky, forgotten video game. A place that looks like Dark Souls 2, if it wasn't complete shit.
Oof, we are off to a good start. The very first clip is the so-called hidden archer he complained so much about. So, someone with non-existent observational skills is going to talk about the difference between the two versions. This is going to be fun. He did not even notice an archer that he hit 5 seconds ago. His hidden archer? That's him, right there. You see him while pulling the lever. Can't miss him. In Vanilla, this archer starts on the lower platform and there's another along captain here as well. But most importantly, the turtles are no longer standing on the platforms, so it's just a bit more annoying to deal with them. As you saw in this side-by-side comparison, their pathfinding was also worse in Vanilla, which just makes the game feel less polished overall. Here's another example of their bad pathfinding that shows that this room turned from clumsily put together in Vanilla to actually functioning in sChoLaR. But let's move on.
In this dream, every encounter you once had that felt like the game designers had a hard-on for killing the player as much as possible has now vanished. In this dream, even the worst levels in the entire Dark Souls series like Shrine of Amana and Iron Keep are fun.
Shrine of Amana? Seriously? I will show more parts of this area whenever they are relevant to the clips he is showing, but for now just pay attention to the aggro range of the enemies. The priestesses had a third more aggro range in Vanilla. This led to more frustrating moments, which I will address in later parts of this video. Even the ogre would attack before you even left the safe path. In the sChoLaR edition, you really had to get much closer to get his attention.
If you told me 2 weeks ago that there was a fun version of Dark Souls 2 that was hidden away in a $40 DLC Steam pack, I would have told you that sounds preposterous.
This is one of many encounters that was just worse in Vanilla, as you had archers shooting at you that were further away from the mammoths in sChoLaR. And we all know that he likes to run past enemies. Well, in the sChoLaR edition you can run past the mammoths and open the door without having to worry about them.
There is no way that FromSoft would take a good game and make a series of unnecessary changes that are all bad just to justify selling the old game again at full price, right?
The statue in front of the rune sentinels that he showed makes it more obvious that they are an optional side challenge which prevents new players from getting stuck on them. That's a good change. And he also completely ignores everything that became better, like the explosive barrel that has been added here to easier deal with the 3 enemies on the left. And we always hear about sChoLaR having added enemies everywhere, but the Lost Bastille is one of many areas that had more enemy spam in Vanilla. Like, there were 3 additional dogs on the runback to the rune sentinels, with 2 of them waiting directly at the shortcut. And yeah, the door to nothing is a shortcut. I just love how much out of the box thinking this game encourages. I really think that his Vanilla playthrough was as superficial as his sChoLaR playthrough was, where he just ran through areas without even trying to engage with them. Imagine calling all changes bad, when you used to get attacked by a horde of enemies every time you wanted to shop at straight. Or getting shot at by archers whenever you spawned at a Lost Sinner bonfire. Yeah, those are just some of the frustrating parts of Vanilla you never hear sChoLaR haters mention.
I trusted the average Redditor. I trusted the average 2015 forum post that told me that sChoLaR was the superior version because of some balancing tweaks that I don't care about.
One of the major balancing tweaks for me is the reduction of chain aggro. I will show more examples throughout the video, but a good one is right at the beginning of the game. You just want to fight one hollow infantry, but then two others join the battle and the archer starts shooting at you. In sChoLaR, this encounter, like many others, is just a lot more relaxed, as you fight them in smaller groups. The archer has a much lower aggro range, which, as we've also seen in the Shrine of Amana, is a common difference throughout the game. A less frustrating early game provides a much better experience for both new and recurring players. Another of my favorite balancing tweaks is that spiders are now afraid of the torch, which makes all of dArK more interesting and less ganky.
I was told that Vanilla Dark Souls 2 is worse in certain areas like Drangleic Castle, and I was lied to. Every level of Vanilla Dark Souls 2 is better than sChoLaR the First Sin, and I'm here to prove it.
Using Norman's Wharf as an example for a level that's better in vanilla is really one of the hottest takes of all time. It was gankier and did not even have the bridge shortcut. It was worse in every way. No one wants to spend twice as much time getting back to the boss. Even the friendly hollow is missing and everyone loves that cute guy.
If you watched my video, another hate-filled critique about Dark Souls 2, then you are familiar with the fact that I hate Dark Souls 2. However,
if you watched my video analyzing his gameplay footage from that video, then you are familiar with the fact that he never paid any attention and constantly accused the game of being unfair instead of accepting that he is suffering from skill issues.
when I made this video, I had only played sChoLaR the First Sin, which is the definitive edition re-release of Dark Souls 2, and definitive is in quotations for a reason, because it's not.
Okay, so let us take a closer look at this encounter. In typical vanilla fashion, you just get jumped by a bunch of enemies as soon as you climb up the first ladder. And of course, there's also an archer shooting at you. The hollow on the ladder that teaches new players that they shouldn't run away in random directions is gone now, but instead of him we got two hollows in a tight corridor. As usual, vanilla is ganky by default and there's not much you can do to prevent getting attacked by several enemies at once. It's once again a lot more relaxed in the sChoLaR edition, because it provides the player with control over which enemies they want to aggro and how many at the same time. The enemy on the ladder only becomes a problem for players that decide to wake up a whole horde of hollows and then run to an unknown location instead of just going back down where they came from. This choke point is not inherently bad or unfair just because it punishes poor decisions more.
Under the false pretense that I played the definitive edition of Dark Souls 2.
Under the assumption that you already defeated Fencer Shannon and Armorer Dennis, it is actually easier in sChoLaR to fight your way to this level, as the Alonites are spread further apart, so it's easier to fight them 1 versus 1. In sChoLaR, there are more Alonites on the path to the optional Smelter Demon, but the main path through this area isn't in any way worse than in vanilla in my opinion. Also, did you keep track of how many enemies I've defeated in both clips? I fought against 9 Alonites in vanilla and only 8 in sChoLaR. Yeah, that's because the sChoLaR enemy spam accusations this area receives are overblown.
I made a video about why a bad game is bad, and then got a lot of backlash by Dark Souls 2 fans. And here I was just surprised that there were Dark Souls 2 fans. This is why people don't like me.
He likes to show off this part of the Shrine of Amana, but in reality, this section feels a lot more hectic and stressful in the vanilla version. You open the door and immediately get jumped by a pilgrim while 2 priestesses shoot at you. Once you are done with those 2, yet another bear starts their projectile spam. Now comes the hardest part of this area, and the most frustrating to die to, as it is so close to the next bonfire. I already know that I have to deal with the priestess on the left first, as attacking the one on the right will aggro the pilgrims. This part was brutal in vanilla, but got heavily nerfed in sChoLaR. It is so relaxed and easy in comparison. The first two priestesses got removed, and there's just one priestess attacking here as the second of that pair has been moved out of range. Both versions share a fight against two pilgrims, but at least now they aggro after you have dealt with the other enemies.
But then I tasted the savory flavor of good old vanilla for the first time, and I understood what those crazy people meant when they said that they liked Dark Souls 2. Because Dark Souls 2 is a good game, and sChoLaR ruined it.
Yeah, the courtyard in the back entrance of Lost Bastille was actually easier in vanilla, but I would argue that it felt empty. That's it. That's all the enemies you had to defeat before you could pull the lever. I think that this encounter was better balanced in the sChoLaR edition. You just finished No Man's Wharf, so you would expect something that's not significantly easier than the previous area. Instead of a basically empty courtyard, it's now an interesting challenge. A few more dogs don't bother me, as DS2 has the least annoying ones. I'm also a big fan of the additional optional Pursuer encounters. They provide the player with easy access to Twinkling Titanite and a good amount of souls. In vanilla he also showed up outside of the boss fight a couple of times, but like many other mechanics it feels unfinished in that version.
Before we really dive into the meat and potatoes of this game, I should make 3 statements. I will refer to the original Dark Souls 2 as vanilla and sChoLaR of the First Sin edition as sChoLaR throughout this video, so get used to it, I guess. The order in which you played the 2 versions of Dark Souls 2 will impact your overall opinion of the game.
What we saw here is yet another example of an encounter that isn't in any way worse in the sChoLaR edition. In vanilla it is easy to get ganked by a group of hammer bros if you aren't playing carefully. This encounter has more enemy variety and less ambushes in sChoLaR. The 3 hammer bros up the stairs got replaced by a single desert sorceress. There is a mannequin hidden around the corner, but he doesn't aggro unless you walk into that side path, so he's less of a problem than the hammer bro in vanilla. If you take the other entrance, there's another hammer bro ambush waiting around the corner in vanilla. In sChoLaR, this one got replaced by a mannequin ambush that is much easier to detect. There is also a pyromancer lady on the balcony in the sChoLaR version, which makes it more obvious that there's a hidden wall up there.
If you played vanilla first and then sChoLaR, you will look at sChoLaR as an optional hard mode.
Vanilla felt easier to him as he already finished sChoLaR several times and got used to the game. In reality, sChoLaR became easier in so many ways, like plenty of additional NPC summons, earlier access to infusions and several bosses that got nerfed, like the very first boss. It may not look like much, but the 10% damage nerf the last giant received can be the difference between dying after 2 hits or being able to survive them.
However, if you played sChoLaR first and then vanilla, you will look at vanilla as an actual good game, and my positive opinion of certain levels like Shrine of Amana may be connected to the fact that I literally have PTSD of the 1,000 enemies in sChoLAR's Shrine of Amana that made vanilla feel like a cakewalk by comparison.
The beginning of the Crumbled Ruins is harder in sChoLaR, but earlier in this video I have shown that the second half of this section was much harder in vanilla. Once you reach the hut in sChoLaR, you're basically done with this area, but in vanilla, that's where the pain begins. Overall, this makes it less frustrating in the sChoLaR version, as you usually die right next to the bonfire and only lose a tiny bit of progress, while in vanilla you usually die at the end of this section and have to do it all over again.
Vanilla Dark Souls 2 has huge issues, and this video is by no means trying to write those off. Just about all of the bad section from my previous critique of sChoLaR holds true for vanilla.
The Ancient Dragon was very frustrating in vanilla as he could easily one-shot players, but he was heavily nerfed in sChoLaR.
Although these issues still persist, most of the ugly from my critique that details the worst levels of sChoLaR is not applicable to vanilla, as the enemy placement is completely different. Vanilla has some issues, and sChoLaR fixed none of them.
sChoLaR generally made optional side challenges harder by making the main path easier, which can be seen here by the 5th torturer that has been added on the path to the chariot. The regular path to the next bonfire was a bit gankier in vanilla. For example, the second sickle wielding enemy that sometimes aggroes if you have unlucky timing no longer exists in sChoLaR. But more importantly, in vanilla you just get attacked by a bunch of thieves on the way to the lever. And this last one might attack you right when you want to pull it. In sChoLaR, the thieves are initially standing around passively until you pull the lever, so you can easily deal with them. You might think that it's unfair that they are kind of hidden, but you usually notice them while trying to catch the Usain Bolt hollow. That one also makes this area feel more alive. On the way to the Skeleton Lords there was yet another thief gank that got removed in sChoLaR. And no, replacing that ambush with an NPC invader does not make sChoLaR harder, as you still had to fight her in vanilla.
While adding onto the pile of crap that I reviewed in my first critique on Dark Souls 2.
This might be a controversial take, but more enemies do not always make the game harder. Both versions have an Alon Knight hidden up on that pillar, but in vanilla he is more likely to surprise you while fighting the turtle in the tight corridor. In sChoLaR there's a second knight dropping down from the end of the pillar, but this means that you will hear the other one drop down.
While I start covering the levels of vanilla, keep in mind that this is not a Dark Souls 2 is perfect or Dark Souls 2 is better than Dark Souls 1 video, because neither of those things are true. However, what this video is a Dark Souls 2 is a good game video, because, well, I actually like Dark Souls 2. Shocking.
Since he showed clips from Lost Bastille again, I will show yet another encounter from that area that was worse in the vanilla version. There used to be 3 of Aldia's monstrosities on the way to the Lost Sinner that got replaced by a single Flexile Sentry in the sChoLaR edition. Lore-wise it makes more sense for a Flexile Sentry to be here, as they are always related to prisoners. In vanilla, that Flexile Sentry used to be in the Shrine of Winter, where it made no sense. And while I'm already here, let us take a look at some other enemy placements. Vanilla used to have this goblin ambush here. In sChoLaR it got replaced by a less ganky fight against falconers. The additional falconers not only increase enemy variety, but they also make it a lot easier to farm sunlight medals. The shaded woods fog also used to be more annoying in vanilla, as the moaning phase trees didn't do anything, but in sChoLaR they can be used to distract the invisible enemies. You might also notice that they are no longer invisible for me, as sChoLaR makes them visible once you get the Eye of the Priestess from Ilium Lois.
Let's jam a bite-sized critique of vanilla as my way of comparing vanilla to sChoLaR. And only 0.5 minutes in, vanilla is already better. The stupid tutorial statue is gone. Why is there a petrified statue that blocks off the final part of the tutorial?
The first reason is that they don't want new players to think that they already have to fight against the 2 ogres. This makes it more obvious that backtracking is important in this game. Secondly, it shows players that the Petrified Statues are an important mechanic. And I guess they want to prevent new players from jumping into the transgender coffin too early.
Where you have the option of fighting 2 ogres. I like it when there are optional hard fights in the beginning of the game that players can attempt at a lower level but probably lose to come back at a higher level and then clear the enemies.
Except of course if it's something like the empty half of Heide's tower having turned into an optional mid-game side challenge. That's somehow bad because he wants to do it early, but we will come back to that argument later.
So why did they get rid of it? Now the only way to reach the end of the tutorial is to acquire a fragrant branch of yore. This decision is especially questionable when you consider that branches of yore are hard to find items that are required for moving forward through the mid-game in places like the Shaded Woods.
Here I would just like to point out that sChoLaR added 3 easy to find fragrant branches to the early game. He considers them hard to find because he couldn't even be bothered to just explore areas, but not because they are actually hidden. If you want to access shaded woods in vanilla, it takes hours of progress, as there are no readily available early fragrant branches. But in sChoLaR you can do it 10 minutes after starting the game. There are more statues, but also more freedom of progression. Like most mechanics, the implementation just feels unfinished in vanilla.
Or the Rune Sentinels, unless you use the Rune Sentinel boss skip, but the most obvious path forward as dictated by the game is for the player to use the branch of Yor to fight the Rune Sentinels.
Actually, the most obvious statue as dictated by the game is Rosabeth. She's the only one that looks important.
See that statue? Gives me the willies. You stare at it for long enough, it starts to look alive. Hey, you don't think a real live person was turned to stone, do you?
So that by the time you reach the Rune Sentinel boss, you will need a branch of Yor, but you might have already spent that on the tutorial Petrified Statue, which you probably shouldn't have, since the only easily found branch of Yor is from the life gem.
He might honestly be the first person that missed the obvious branch right in front of the Rune Sentinels.
One of the 2 early branches in the Lost Bastille is only accessible through the Rune Sentinel boss skip.
Just for clarity, he showed the path to the Rune Sentinels. The actual boss skip is going through Norman's Wharf to discover the back entrance to Lost Bastille.
So if you miss this skip, then there's only one other early game branch in some random room in No Man's Wharf. So there are 2 branches for 3 statues. What the actual hell?
The fact that he couldn't even be bothered to explore every room once again shows just how much he rushed through the game without even trying to actually playing it.
So branches are rare items that are always in hard to find places. Then why let the players misuse the only easy to obtain branch on the tutorial?
Why is he even playing a FromSoft game if he doesn't like that to require exploration and experimentation?
When they should probably just use it for the Rune Sentinels. It just sounds like the sChoLaR developers want players to get stuck. But guess what? The Rune Sentinel boss run statue is also taken away in vanilla.
In reality, it's the opposite. Players were much more likely to get stuck on the Rune Sentinels in vanilla, as sChoLaR makes it more obvious that they are an optional side challenge. sChoLaR also gives you the Dull Ember right before Macduff, instead of hiding it away in Iron Keep. This allows you to get stronger earlier and faster.
Vanilla made me like Petrified Statues. The overabundance of Petrified Statues that block your progress for no reason other than to piss you off is one of the first of many changes sChoLaR does for no reason other than to fulfill a quota of changes that piss people off so that we can resell an old game at full price again.
Feeble King never engaged with half the mechanics and content in this game. But for regular players, it's great that they can access both Shaded Woods and Straight long before they could do so in vanilla.
The first level, the Forest of the Fallen Giants, is actually easy now, kind of what first levels in video games should be like.
Okay, so vanilla had 2 hollow soldiers here that got replaced by a turtle in sChoLaR. They simply exchange places. I don't see how vanilla forest is in any way easier. See, sChoLaR has 2 soldiers down here where vanilla had a turtle.
And in place of the undead army that sChoLaR put in the first level, we have an optional fight with the king of SJWs himself.
Here we saw another great example of him blaming the game for his own bad decisions. You only get attacked by this whole horde of enemies if you decide to wake them all up at the same time, while vanilla just ganked you by default, as we saw earlier. It's just the laziest way of falsely presenting sChoLaR as gank here.
The White Knight. The Heide Knights are also the Black Knights of Dark Souls 2, which are optional hard enemies that will kick a new player's ass and even give a returning player a run for their money. And for some reason in sChoLaR they put every Heide Knight in one level in the beginning of the game.
This argument actually just shows us that he rushed through the game so much that he didn't even notice that the Heide Knights still show up in the exact same amount of areas. The one with the spear used to be in the lost Bastille. Well, he's still there. He just got moved to a later part of that area. The one that drops the lance used to wield a sword in the vanilla version. He was found after the Shrine of Winter on the way to the castle. In sChoLaR, he sits around in the gutter, but is now actually using the equipment that he drops. sChoLaR merely moved those around a bit, they weren't moved to Heide's tower.
Heide's Tower of Flame lies beyond the far gate.
Thanks, Scholar. The Heide Knights did nothing to improve Heide's Tower of Flame other than to piss you off when the optional boss is dead and all of the White Knights just activate, which is plain annoying and obnoxious.
This argument always feels like people are complaining about getting more content. In vanilla, the optional half of Heide's Tower felt empty and repetitive. You just fought a few more old knights and that was it. This area didn't feel as special or interesting as it does in the sChoLaR version, where it turned into an optional mid-game challenge. So let us hear again how he feels about such encounters.
I like it when there are optional hard fights in the beginning of the game that players can attempt at a lower level but probably lose to come back at a higher level and then clear the enemies.
That's exactly what the empty feeling half of Heide's Tower turned into in the sChoLaR version. You get stomped if you try it at the beginning of the game, but can come back later for an engaging challenge. There is a lot more enemy variety, and I enjoy fighting against the Heide Knights a lot more than just fighting against more old knights. The Drake can be annoying if you don't know how to run to him safely, but to me that's better than getting bored in the vanilla version. Especially as vanilla also has more old knights on the path to no man's Wharf. It just gets old fighting against the same enemy 15 times in a row. sChoLaR generally has more interesting encounters, as there are more varied types of enemies in almost every area. And if you care about fashion, it's now feasible to actually farm the Heide Knight armor set, which used to be a complete chore in vanilla that required a lot of bonfire aesthetics and luck.
Now if you want to fight Ornstein after beating the Fat Man, there's just a bunch of white knights that'll chase you down faster than anyone who's ever insulted Pokimane. Now that I think about it, just about all of those horrifying...
The Red Phantom shows us that he is in New Game Plus, with a glass cannon build without any heavy armor or stat boosting wings.
Just about all of those horrifying PTSD memories of getting jumped around every corner of every level is gone in vanilla. In my previous video I said that there were so many ganks in No Man's Wharf that it felt like enemies were spawning off screen.
In vanilla, there's a hollow hiding at the beginning that feels like he's actually spawning off screen unless you happen to look behind that corner. In sChoLaR, he is placed in a position where you are much more likely to notice him.
Looking back at the gameplay, some of the ganks could have been prevented if I was more observant, but I still don't understand why the amount of ganks that have to occur in the level has to be so damn high. No Man's Wharf has a gank squad hidden around every corner of sChoLaR.
In vanilla, this encounter is a gank fight with two hollows and a pirate. And did you notice the spider monkey in the background? If I wouldn't have had the torch out, he would have attacked as well. In sChoLaR, this encounter is just a bunch of easy hollows. Sure, there are more enemies here, but I don't think that it is in any way harder.
And in addition to this, when you trigger one of the enemies, the entire group will just come stomping in to make sure the game always feels like there are respawning enemies off screen.
He clearly has no idea what he is talking about. In vanilla, this very encounter is always 3 pirates and a dog attacking at the same time. The pirate on the right couldn't even have seen me, but still joined the fight. As usual, sChoLaR is fairer and less ganky, as you can fight the enemies in small groups or all alone. It's really interesting how often he uses clips of encounters that were evidently worse in vanilla as evidence that sChoLaR is the gankier version.
The enemy AI in vanilla is more akin to Dark Souls 1, so it's easier to aggro a couple of enemies, take them out, and then aggro a few more.
He is just making false claim after false claim without any regard for facts at all. If you drop down here in vanilla, you will get attacked by enemy after enemy. Just look at that enemy spam. In sChoLaR, this encounter is once again much easier to handle, as most of the enemies are too drunk to join the battle. Once again, all the problems he complains about were worse in the vanilla version. Oh my god, this was just the first 8 minutes of his video. Okay, for the sake of my sanity, I can't keep on nitpicking every single clip, as there is just way too much I would have to clarify or debunk. Now I will just focus on some false claims to keep it short. You can watch his full video if you want more context, but just keep everything you've learned so far in mind.
And sChoLaR shoves so many enemies into every level that fighting all the enemies just appears to be a waste of time when it was reasonable in vanilla.
The red phantom we see in this clip does not even respawn, so fighting her clearly would have not been a waste of time. He just made it harder by trying to ignore her.
Because whether or not you're supposed to run past or fight the enemies, there's enemy spam everywhere in sChoLaR. Now I know how all of this sounds. sChoLaR, the first Sin Shrine of Amana, makes me feel like I'm back in Nam, dodging bullets as the commies chase me down with sticks.
As we saw earlier, the hard part of Shrine of Amana was actually much harder in vanilla and got heavily nerfed in sChoLaR, but he never acknowledges this.
I did hear that Shrine of Amana was nerfed in vanilla because of the community backlash, so maybe I just played the easiest version of Shrine of Amana and that's why I liked it. Either way, I did enjoy my time spent with Shrine of Amana in vanilla.
And as I've also shown earlier, this ogre would have not joined the fight in the sChoLaR version. There are just so many moments where he does not notice encounters that were harder in vanilla.
I will also say that the Shrine of Amana boss run is still a bit on the crap side even in vanilla, but it isn't too hard to run past the enemies.
Once again, he falsely makes it seem as if sChoLaR made this runback worse. It's trivially easy in that version with not many priestesses shooting at you and barely any enemies in your path. As usual, vanilla has more enemy spam and more priestesses shooting at you at the same time. It's really interesting how often Feeble King manages to falsely present encounters that are obviously worse in vanilla in the exact opposite way.
Remember all the terrible boss runs? Most of them are manageable, a few are kinda bad, and like 2 are downright terrible. But still, it's been reduced significantly.
I seriously don't see how vanilla reduced the difficulty of runbacks significantly, as I have already shown how the runbacks to bosses like the Rune Sentinels, Flexile Sentry, Freya or Demon of Song were worse in vanilla, so here are some other examples. Like so many times throughout this video, he just keeps on claiming the opposite of what's actually true.
Want to do the DLC? Well, you don't need to look up a guide to find out where 3 impossibly hidden keys are, you just get them for free.
He considers them to be impossibly hidden because he rushed through the game so much that he couldn't even be bothered to just pick up every item. 2 of the keys require backtracking, but anyone that actually plays this game will remember that there were doors in the beginning that he couldn't open yet. He makes it seem as if giving players meaningful rewards for exploration is somehow bad. The one for sChoLaR is a bit more hidden, but I personally wondered how I can get up to this ledge in the Black Gulch, which led me to discover the Forgotten Key. Then I noticed that it opens those stone doors and remembered that there was another one in the hole. The point is that the keys will be found by curious players that enjoy exploration.
The rest of the game is so much easier that it's just one little difficulty spike, because vanilla Dark Souls 2 is a thoughtfully designed game that is easy in the beginning and then gradually gets more difficult, while sChoLaR is just random enemy spam the whole time.
As you've seen throughout this video, sChoLaR is so much more thoughtfully designed. As another example, vanilla didn't even give you any hint that you are supposed to burn the windmill. But sChoLaR placed an enemy there to guard it and added an NPC summon that waits and points at it to make it more obvious.
I don't care what you say, the fact that you can skip the beginning of the game with 1 million souls is cool as hell. I'm never gonna do it, but it's freeing to know that it's always a choice. sChoLaR got rid of this because it's no fun.
I don't know why he felt the need to do so, but Feeble King just made it up. Everyone knows that the million soul skip still works in the sChoLaR version. But did you know that you have to push the door open manually when using the skip?
Also, the undead dragon vanilla comes to life and killed me? Now that's a good time. Why doesn't sChoLAR's undead dragon come to life? Why are the developers allergic to fun?
It did not get removed. It just turned into a reward for exploration and defeating all 4 Fallen here. See? It's still happening. Just not instantly when you walk into this room.
And why does sChoLaR block the cool looking dragon level behind another fucking petrified statue?
Nothing is blocked here. You can still access the whole area. What actually has changed is that you now explore the area backwards. This area is optional now, so all the upgrade materials you can find here are now a reward for people that like to explore. Another change is that the drakes used to aggro by default in vanilla, which meant that you had to take care of them. In the sChoLaR version they are asleep until you break a few eggs, which makes it easier to farm all the crystal lizards. And it also gives a lot more importance to the eggs themselves.
In every level of sChoLaR, there are always some gank squads that will wait in a very hard to find area, and then when the enemies in front aggro, a timer is set, and then eventually the gank squad wakes up and kills you. Every time this happens, I'm not left thinking, wow, what a great game. I'm just learning that there is no reason to go through these levels slowly since there's a cheap death around every corner.
This so-called cheap death was caused by him not paying any attention to enemies hanging from ledges and ignoring the sound of a thief dropping down behind him. It would have been prevented if he did play slowly like this game has been teaching him from the start. I'm too lazy to go on with this video, but I hope that I could clarify some misconceptions about the differences between the two versions. In summary, sChoLaR improved the game in a lot of aspects, and his claims about it having a harder early game and worse enemy placements just aren't true if you do a fair side-by-side comparison. There are still so many improvements that I did not even mention in this video. sChoLaR is just so much better in so many ways. Okay, I just can't let go. Before I end this video, here is yet another example of vanilla just being less fair than sChoLaR. In vanilla, the Zellora spider trap has barely any indication of danger, while sChoLaR has the spiders hanging from the ceiling to give you a clue of what's about to happen. Additionally, it's in a dark cave, so you are likely to have to dodge out, which prevents them from even attacking in sChoLaR. So, now I'm actually done showing why the vast majority of people that played both versions prefer the improved sChoLaR version. Goodbye!